Outlet malls are supposed to be places where you score a good deal on shoes, not where your life depends on how fast you can run. But on May 6, 2023, in Allen, Texas, a man in black stepped out of his car and made sure that wasn't the case. This wasn't random. He had a plan, a carefully mapped out, Google-reviewed, weapons stockpiled plan. He spent weeks preparing, taking pictures of the mall, tracking its busiest hours, and, because he clearly needed an audience, uploaded his 300-page diary to a Russian social media site. What he wrote in there? Let's just say it wasn't poetry. What followed was 4 minutes of absolute devastation. And what investigators uncovered afterward, that's the part that will leave you wondering how many red flags can pile up before someone decides to actually do something. Before we dive into this story, if you like your true crime brief and bingeable, you're in the right place. Hit follow now for at least 2 new episodes every week. This is 10 Minute Murder. Let's get into it. On May 6, 2023, a man dressed head to toe in black pulled up to an outlet mall in Allen, Texas. No hesitation, no build-up, just cold, deliberate action. The second his foot hit the pavement, he raised his gun and started shooting. There was no pattern, no target, just bullets flying toward anyone in range. People scrambled, diving behind displays, ducking into storage rooms. Mall employees, suddenly thrust into the role of makeshift first responders, guided strangers to whatever cover they could find. It lasted 4 minutes. 4 minutes in which 15 people were shot. 8 never made it out, including 3 children. Among the 7 survivors were parents who lost their children and children who lost their entire families. Amid the horror, one military veteran on the scene did not hesitate. He dropped to his knees and started performing CPR, trying to keep victims alive. Later, he recalled that many of the wounded were so badly injured, they couldn't even be treated on the spot. They needed hospitals, fast. Then, a break in the nightmare, if you could even call it that. An off-duty police officer happened to be at the mall. No backup, no waiting, just a trained officer with his own weapon moving toward the gunfire while panicked 911 calls flooded dispatch. And when he saw the shooter, he fired. 3 shots. Ear, arm, mouth. The last one ended it. The shooter went down before he could take more lives. This officer did not hesitate. He didn't blink. He didn't think twice. He just did what needed to be done. Now, the death toll stood at 9, including the shooter himself. And with him gone, so was any chance of a confession. No interrogation, no courtroom cross-examination, just a pile of chaos left behind for investigators to sift through. They had to work backward, following the trail of public records and digital footprints, trying to answer the one question that mattered most. Why? The shooter was identified as 33-year-old Mauricio Martinez Garcia, but figuring out what led him to that moment wasn't so simple. He had no criminal record, nothing to suggest he'd been planning something this violent. The earliest red flag? 2008. At 18, Mauricio joined the military and completed basic training. But before he could move forward, before he even got to weapons training, he was discharged over concerns about his mental health. Since he hadn't committed any crimes, nothing about his discharge made its way to any official record. After that, his life became a string of jobs, one leading to the next without much direction. Eventually, he landed work as a security guard, a job that required him to undergo weapons training. That training, plus the time he spent at shooting ranges, as seen in his social media posts, gave him the skills he would eventually use to take innocent lives. At the time of the shooting, Mauricio had been living in a motel. When investigators searched his room, they found a diary. Now, you might expect something obvious, some angry, hate-fueled manifesto spelling out his reasons in black and white. But that wasn't the case. His diary wasn't a confession. It wasn't even a blueprint for violence. Instead, it was a slow-motion unraveling. Page by page, post by post, investigators traced Mauricio's decline, his mind twisting, his thoughts turning darker. They followed his path straight into the depths of extreme far-right radicalization. Not overnight, not all at once, but step by step, thought by thought, until it led him to that mall, that gun, that decision. Mauricio Garcia didn't just keep a diary, he published it. Over 300 pages of his handwritten thoughts made their way to a Russian social media site where he meticulously uploaded each page one by one. And in those pages, a mix of the mundane and the unhinged. He ranted about former bosses and coworkers, detailing the imaginary fights he wished he'd had with people who crossed him on the street. Then, just as casually, he'd write about concerts, parties, and past relationships. Women were a frequent subject. Some he'd been with, some he'd only wished he had. His diary included graphic descriptions of the nurses he encountered in the hospital, recounting how their attention toward him had aroused him to the point of masturbating to the memory. But underneath it all was an unraveling. His thoughts shifted between self-loathing and blame. In one entry, he lamented becoming an incel, a term used by men who believe they are involuntarily celibate because of women's rejection. In another, he expressed resentment toward his own Hispanic community, writing about how he once wished he was white because his own race had treated him so poorly. From there, his diary became a manifesto of resentment, critiquing the Hispanic community's stance on poverty, politics, and racial dynamics. With every entry, he drifted further into radicalization, spiraling into the dark corners of extremist ideology. At some point, something inside him broke, though when exactly is hard to say. When Mauricio stepped out of his car that day, he was wearing a tactical vest with a patch reading RWDS, an acronym for Right-Wing Death Squad. This wasn't some random edgy phrase. It was a reference to a paramilitary death squad from the 1970s Latin America, infamous for their brutal execution of left-wing dissidents. Victims were loaded onto helicopters and thrown to their deaths in what were called death flights. Today, extremist groups idolized RWDS and what it stood for. And Mauricio wasn't just wearing the patch, he was living the ideology. His vest wasn't the only clue. 2 neo-Nazi tattoos were inked onto his body, and on his Russian social media profile, he'd shared photos of them alongside rants about Jewish, Muslim, and Arab people, as well as an increasing disdain for women. Mauricio Garcia's attack on the Allen premium outlets was anything but spontaneous. It was the result of meticulous planning and chilling foresight. Weeks before the shooting, Garcia conducted a thorough reconnaissance of the mall. He posted numerous photos of the building and its parking lot on his profile. These posts included screenshots of Google geolocation information, indicating he had previously visited the mall on May 14, 2022, January 7, 2023, and April 15, 2023. He also shared screenshots showing the mall's busiest times and had an indoor map of the facility. Garcia's preparations extended to amassing a significant arsenal. He had at least 4 different pistols, 2 assault rifles, a pump-action shotgun, and large amounts of ammunition. A digital receipt indicated that he had purchased more firearms in the year leading up to the attack. Just 24 minutes before initiating the attack, Garcia sent links to his YouTube and his Russian profile to a rock singer. Prior to this, these accounts had been private, with no followers or friends, suggesting a deliberate move to publicize his extremist views. This calculated approach underscores that Garcia's actions were not merely an outburst of violence, but a premeditated attempt to inflict maximum harm and achieve notoriety. The Allen Mall shooting wasn't an isolated incident. It was a part of a disturbing pattern in Texas and across the United States. In 2023, Texas experienced a surge in gun violence. The state had the second highest number of mass shootings in the country, with only California reporting more. Nationally, the numbers were actually pretty alarming. By December 2023, the United States had endured 39 mass shootings, surpassing previous records. In the aftermath of the Allen shooting, President Joe Biden addressed the nation, stating, "Thoughts and prayers are not enough." He urged Congress to pass an assault weapons ban and implement universal background checks. Despite these calls for action, legislative changes remained elusive. The political landscape continued to hinder significant reforms, leaving communities vulnerable to future tragedies. The Allen community, like so many others before it, was left to grapple with the aftermath. Local leaders expressed their grief and solidarity, emphasizing the need for collective healing. The Allen Mall shooting serves as a stark reminder of the ongoing challenges posed by gun violence here in America. It underscores the urgency for comprehensive solutions to address this persistent and devastating issue. Thank you for listening to this episode of 10-Minute Murder. I'm Joe, the host, and if you're a brand new listener to the podcast, welcome. Make sure you hit subscribe. Wherever you're listening right now, hit subscribe, and also follow the show on social media, if you've got social media. I know so many people are kind of deleting their socials, and I get it. But if you do happen to have social media and you're on there, follow 10-Minute Murder. And if not, like I said, that's cool. But make sure you go to 10minutemurder.com. That's where you'll find everything that there is to know about the podcast. And since I know that people are kind of going away from social media a little bit in this current political time where no one really wants to see that stuff day in, day out, if you go to 10minutemurder.com, in the blog section, I'm going to start uploading more and more of the photos that I usually put on social media. Like for this episode in particular, where I talked about certain things, those photos will be in the blog section at 10minutemurder.com. But one thing that I don't have on the website is my new podcast. I say new, it's a few months old. So it's new to me still. 10-Minute Mystery. So if you are into the brief and bingeable vibe like this one is, but you don't necessarily all the time want to hear about murder, you can hear about mysteries. So check that out if you want to. And that's going to do it for this episode. Again, thank you so much for listening to 10-Minute Murder.